Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Deep Dive with Otelli and myself, Stephen. Now, Otelli, let me ask you, are you an insurance kind of person? Do you buy travel insurance, medical insurance, all that kind of stuff?
I'm not super fond of it. Like, I do not buy travel
really?
insurance. Okay. Yep. But we'll save that for another day because today we're here to talk about health insurance and all that. That I have.
Okay,
So,
you're not worried that, because insurance is there sort of as a backup plan in case something happens, right?
Sure. But I think for like travel insurance and all of that, if it's just like amounts to a few $100s, I'm okay handling with that. It's more of the hospitalization that goes up to the tens of thousands
Right.
that I'm worried about. So that's where I'm covered. But I heard that you actually have a folder or some kind of a file with all your family members' insurance in there.
Yeah, it's just, it gets so hard to organize. So I have, whenever we buy the insurance, I put it online in the cloud so I know when
So
it's
you've got it
valid
all
from when
covered,
to when.
basically.
Yeah. I mean, I like to think we're covered enough, but not over-insured.
So are you with Great Eastern, by the way?
No, I'm not. Yeah, I won't tell you who I'm with.
Yeah, so because that is what we're here to talk about.
Yes.
It's been in the news, Great Eastern, which is one of Singapore's largest insurers. Basically, they have stopped pre-authorization for two private hospitals, Mount Elizabeth Orchard and Mount Elizabeth Novena. So in a nutshell, what does it mean for policyholders? What are our options and choices? That's what we're here to explore today. We gotta kick things off by talking about the technical stuff first. I didn't even know what pre-authorization was about because I have my policies with public hospitals, so there isn't such a thing as that.
Yeah. So the pre-authorization and the letter of guarantee. What does that actually mean?
All right, so pre-authorization is a service given by insurers to assess the claim or the episode of care to see whether they will pay for it. So it was recommended in 2016 by the Health Insurance Task Force, right, in order to mitigate rising premiums. So at that time, insurance premiums were also going up too rapidly. So there were three recommendations to control the rise of premiums. One is medical panel, the second is fee benchmarks, and the third is to implement pre-authorization. So pre-authorization is a process whereby prior to the admission, the approval is sought from the insurer as to the medical condition, the estimated bill size, and the procedure that will be done. So this is only meant for planned admissions.
Okay.
So planned surgeries that you plan ahead of time.
But why is it that some insurers actually have this, pre-authorization, and you have others like income, for instance, that don't require that?
Yes. So pre-authorization is a service to be able to give some the customer the assurance, but it's an added step because it happens before the admission, and there's a sort of time pressure in order to approve it. And once pre-auth is approved, up to the the sum of money that the doctor has put in and the hospital has put in, it's virtually guaranteed. So after the stay, the patient is assured of that. It's bringing forward the claim assessment, and that's kind of a bit of a rush for some insurers, and it has added costs. So I think all insurers weigh the pros and cons of implementing pre-auth and whether they want to do it. There's an opportunity to negotiate with the doctor.
But it's good for the patient because they know that they won't be out of pocket in any way.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
Is that the same as a letter of guarantee?
No, it's not the same.
Okay.
So the letter of guarantee guarantees that the insurer will pay up to a certain amount. Right, so it's maybe $30,000 or $50,000. So the letter of guarantee, because the insurer guarantees to the hospital they will pay up to that amount, then the hospital will not demand the deposit. Right? With the pre-auth, the hospital says, all right, I don't need a deposit. You have a pre-auth approval. It's guaranteed. My doctor can admit you and do the surgery, right? So with the LOG, it's slightly different. The insurer guarantees it. So prior to issuing a letter of guarantee, insurers will actually assess, in some ways, the chances that they will pay for the claim, right? There is a chance they won't pay for it.
Oh, okay.
In which case, they will recover the money.
It's a negotiation process.
No, it's a guarantee to the hospital, but not to the patient. So the insurer might recover it from the patient later on.
So they tell the hospital, I will pay for this bill, but they don't tell the patient that I'm paying for you.
So the difference between pre-auth and LOG, right? But the LOG, allows the patient to be admitted without the...
That's very
Let's just clarify
tricky.
again. So pre-authorization means the insurer is saying, I will pay for
the
this
treatment.
bill. For the treatment. Let's say you get your appendix out. I've agreed with the hospital. X amount price, I will pay for it.
Yes.
Letter of guarantee just means...
that up to this sum of money, so the bill could be 200, but the letter of guarantee is for 50,000. So if the
Okay.
hospital says, okay, up to 50,000, I don't take a deposit. Anything
Right,
above that, I
okay,
still need it,
okay.
right?
Okay, so
Right,
so
yes.
what, in a nutshell, right, what does that mean for the Great Eastern policy holders, though, especially those who have like doctors at Mount E?
Right.
Because now they don't have that option, right? So
Yeah,
how,
but some insurers also don't have. So it goes back to the pre-2016 days when they didn't have the option anyway. Right? So it goes back to before when they were not given the assurance. They are under the risk of going in, having the procedure done. And then, but it's not easy for insurers to decline claims.
Right.
Right,
Okay.
so they can educate themselves as to what is covered. Right, it's not easy.
And
right?
in this case,
Yeah.
just to clarify,
Yes.
GE is not saying they won't pay for the bill. They're just saying you
Exactly.
pay first and then
Or
do a
you-
reimbursement,
or you take
and I will.
GE actually said you take an LOG first, right?
Okay.
Yes,
They're just basically
yeah.
making it a bit more challenging to.
But I'm not guaranteeing.
but still, that
guaranteeing
is
the whole
very
bill.
stressful for the patient,
patient,
right? Because
yes.
you're
No, I
lying
disagree.
there.
I disagree.
You disagree?
Okay.
I disagree.
But, yeah, because not being guaranteed and not knowing how much I have to pay in the end, it would be very stressful, especially I'm sick, I have to go for
Yeah,
this
doctor,
surgery.
what are you using
and
now?
I have
New
to-
one. It's okay, never mind. Can we use the cheaper scalpel?
No, I disagree.
Yeah,
I
so-
disagree with that.
Because
Okay.
I think the insurance is there, right, to cover your hospital bills.
But it's not a guarantee, you see. I don't know how many zeros there are at the end.
The
Yeah.
contract,
Okay,
the contract is a
yeah.
guarantee. The contract
Professor
is a
Lim,
guarantee.
Let us get you in on this
yes.
because so from the patient point of view, like Otelli is saying, there
Yeah.
will be some concern, right?
I think patients understandably want guarantees. That's why they purchase these insurance products, and anything that creates this seed of doubt, this uncertainty, changes behavior,
Right.
right? And if we read the fine print, every insurer pretty much says it will cover what is reasonable and customary. However, what that term means
Yeah,
is,
what is reasonable?
is essentially subject to debate. You ask 15 people, you may
Right,
have different
right.
ideas.
So basically, Great Eastern is saying, basically there are other hospitals out there providing the same
Yep.
kind of treatment with the same kind of outcome, is charging 20 to 30% less. In other words, so what Great Eastern is trying to do is trying to actually maybe get their clients to switch hospitals, perhaps to the
To
ones
get
that.
services, to get medical care elsewhere.
I think it is very reasonable that every payer, the insurer, whether it's a private insurer, whether it's the government, will want to get value, right? And the challenge here, in my mind, is that it's almost he says, she says. That Great Eastern says that these two hospitals have higher charges for the same outcomes, for the same case mix, for the same type of patients. IHH disagrees. And where's the data? Healthcare becomes a little more complicated than buying a phone or buying a laptop because different patients may have different risk, right?
Right.
Steve, you may go into hospital and you may have an uneventful 2 days. Someone with kidney failure who had a bypass last year maybe have much higher risk, and this creates the uncertainty. So the ability to, in essence, use advanced analytical methods to be able to compare apple for apple is absolutely integral in really healthcare.
Right.
And this is what we call risk adjustment. And I've not seen any data from any party
Okay.
that has done this in a convincing way.
And they were actually in the midst of negotiations. We know this is a evolving thing. They always renegotiate to review prices, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So,
yeah.
so what happened here? I mean, and again, we must remember they're only marking out these two hospitals, but under IAH, there are
Yeah, in a
IAH, there are
nutshell-
other hospitals
yes,
too,
there's
like
also
Gleneagles.
Gleneagles,
Yeah,
Parkway.
so why not them, right?
Why are they charging? Why are hospitals charging differently for the same treatment? I mean, what
Yeah, what would be some of
goes
the
into
reasons
it?
behind
Yeah.
that?
It is a different customer segment. I mean, at the end of the day, every private healthcare business is still a business, right? In a large F&B group, let's say Tung Luk, there'll be different price points for different offerings.
Okay.
So similarly, if we look at the IHH suite, there's not just differences in clinical expertise and equipment, but the service offerings may be different also.
To break it down, I think different hospitals have different charges,
Yep.
and GE will have access to the data as to the charges. So the detailed bills actually show the differences. So you have surgeon fees that can be standardized with fee benchmarks, but you also have OT facility fees. You have bed charges, which vary between the hospitals. And of course, just
So like
looking
a 5-star bed versus a 3-star bed.
versus 6-star. All right. So So the facilities are all different,
Yeah.
and that attracts different price points. Some insurers have actually dealt with that by tiering the insurance. So if you choose a certain tier of insurance, you can go to all the hospitals.
Okay.
Or you choose a sub-tier,
Yeah.
you can go to some of the hospitals and you pay a lower premium.
Right.
So if they pool all the hospitals, then naturally the premium will go up if everybody chooses the most
But
expensive
right now we
hospitals.
don't, right? We either have, if you choose
No,
to
some of
adopt
them.
the private one, you have access to all the private hospitals.
No,
There
not
are
all
No,
the
it's
insurers are like
different
so.
tier, yes.
Insurers have
Oh.
different schemes
Yeah.
for
Okay.
customers with different different pockets. You know how
I
deep
think
the
it's time for me
pockets
to
are.
talk to my insurance agent.
Yeah, so that's why I
And
mean,
different expectations.
I mean,
and-
what was the difference between choosing like
Yeah.
like public versus private? I mean, because public you can choose the A ward or the premium as well, right? So
Yeah.
what would you say is the main difference there?
Okay, generally, the insurers don't impose a pre-authorization on the public hospitals, and this includes the private wards of the public hospitals because there's a high degree of predictability in the public hospitals because doctors' fees are pretty much set. The hospital charges for room, for other services and so on, very, very predictable, and they're well within the range of what the insurers are prepared to pay. So policyholders who go to a public hospital, generally the experience is pretty fuss-free because there is high degree of conviction amongst the insurers that the fees are going to be reasonable.
So versus the private hospitals, which
Yes.
what you seem to be suggesting is a
There
bit
is-
more
there is-
volatile.
there is much more variability because the doctors price differently, which, as you mentioned, has been attenuated by the fee benchmarks and by the negotiations that the insurers have had
Right.
with the doctors.
So isn't all that enough to keep things in check for them to pull this move now?
It's a
must
constant.
they-
It's a
right?
constant tug and pull.
Right,
There's a
right.
constant.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if we look
Yeah.
at the data, Steve, once upon a time, the doctors' fees were the equivalent of the larger part of the total bill size.
Okay.
Now that the doctors' portion, the surgeons, the anaesthetists, the other doctors who may be involved in the care of the patient, all this has been negotiated since the 2016 Health Insurance Task Force with the empanelment and all that. So the doctors' side of the total bill has been managed downwards, but the facilities portion has been pretty much neglected until relatively recently.
Do you hear this from maybe some of your clients or some of the patients that say, I'm choosing to go public and not private because I don't want the unnecessary, whether it's X-rays or the MRIs or that going with private. Sometimes people associate that. I mean, to what extent that is an issue that's been raised?
And it's always a trade-off, Otelli. In the public sector, generally, there is less servicing, and hence the bill size in the public sector is smaller than in the private sector. However, the convenience, the waiting times, and so on are much more amenable in the private sector. Whereas in the public sector, you may have to wait a couple of days, a couple of weeks. So policyholders or customers need to balance all these factors and decide for themselves what's important to them and then buy the right insurance product.
So in a way, because when we tend to go public, the waiting
Yeah.
time just always feels like it's very much longer, forever. Do we have an estimation of on average, are we talking about what sort of extra waiting time,
What do you
being
mean? If you
involved?
go to a private doctor, you can see the guy
For the same surgery.
tomorrow if I call him today.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
Is that
yes,
right?
pretty much it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is the main trade-off, is the waiting time is just greatly reduced.
It's waiting time not just for the doctor but for the downstream facilities. If the patient needs an MRI or some sort of imaging diagnostic test.
I do agree that the waiting time or the method of getting a different appointment in a public hospital, it's a lot more, the process takes longer than in the private sector.
I mean, if you are unwell, they tell you, there's something in your wherever. You're like, I want to know what it is. I want to get it out as soon as possible, right? So
Not great
waiting
to
3
wait,
months
yeah.
for, it's like, oh my gosh, every day I'm worrying about,
So if I choose to go private, right, what is the fine print that I really have to look out for?
If without pre-auth, is that what you're asking
Both.
about?
Let's just give us both.
You have to be aware of what's being covered by your insurance. You need to understand your disease condition. I think that's one of my pet projects, to get people to be more educated about the treatment that they are getting. You need to know what's being covered by your insurance. I said that insurance, there are some things that will always be rejected, such as cosmetic surgery, unnecessary surgery, preventative is also tends to be rejected, right? So be aware of the condition, be aware of the risk. Without a pre-auth or LOG, you can always check with your insurer if you're not sure. And I think for every customer, they should be aware whether there are pre-existing diseases that are excluded from their policy. And if it's been too long since they bought their policy, just give your insurer a call and confirm
if these
that.
changes suddenly appear, right? Like GE just said, okay, no pre-authorization for these two hospitals. I mean, do policyholders have any right, any recourse, or it's just you're at the mercy of
If they are your insurance company, then I think you're a bit stuck, right?
No, I think pre-auth is a service. It's an added service, right?
So because we're so used to the added service that once it's taken away, you feel a bit...
correct. You feel a bit deprived, but actually
I
it's
think we just need to figure out what the expectation level is. And if, as what Dr. Yoong mentions, if our service expectation is pre-2016, then of course today the world is beautiful, right? But if our expectation is basically 2025, right, before all these measures will come into place, then clearly it will be perceived as unfair, perceived as unjust, and the customers do have limited recourse.
But we have other insurance providers like Prudential, AIA. They are not withdrawing their pre-authorization,
Actually, that was my question. Is this going to be the start of a move that other insurers might then say, hey...
I guess from the private hospital's point of view, is this the start of the slippery slope?
Right.
If I give in to one, will I give in to all of them? Right? And will I then see margins erode and these doomsday scenarios can be very worrying for the private healthcare operators. That said, I guess the question that enough insurers have asked me is that insurers typically have low single-digit profits at the end of everything.
Okay.
Private hospitals typically do 20, 30%. And they look and say, well, we're all hard at work. Why are you doing these margins? And why am I dealing with these much more modest margins?
I mean, there's always this argument about who's taking all the excess off the table, right? Yeah, but I think pre-auth, to your question, whether pre-auth will ultimately be removed by all the other insurers, I think the question is whether the insurer's experience with pre-auth has been good. It has been recommended as a means of managing costs, but pre-auth is expensive in itself to run. Right, it takes a logistics. There's a lot of time pressures. A lot of people, and I know a lot of doctors have fed back to me. They hate the pre-auth process,
right?
Because the insurer keep asking them a lot of questions. They have to keep going back, right? So a lot will depend on the experience. If pre-auth is not effective in reducing the cost of the claims, right, then naturally it will be removed, and we shouldn't see it as a bad thing, because if the administrative costs go down, then ultimately your premiums will go down. Right?
Yeah.
We hope.
So, but if pre-auth is effective in actually reducing the claims cost, then pre-auth should stay.
No, but Dr. Yoong, insurance at its heart is about peace of mind, right? And however we slice the deck, the patients are not experts. They cannot be expected to know this is covered, this is not covered.
Yes.
Beyond the most glaring tummy tuck boob jobs are unlikely to be covered. But once we start slicing into implant A versus implant B, the use of a Da Vinci robot versus something else, all of these, the patients cannot be expected to know. And if we go back to the purpose of why we buy insurance, it's for financial protection against medical catastrophes, and it's for peace of mind.
I would say that
if we don't achieve either of these,
it's not in the fine print that Da Vinci is not allowed, by all means claim it. But if it was in the pre-auth and it says no, I don't allow it, then of course the insurer has a right, right?
Yes.
So I think it's, like I said, it's quite difficult to really change the contract and says I'm not covering it, and put the customer at risk. No.
Yeah, it's challenging also because now we've got the insurer, the doctor, and the patient. Is that triangle, right?
Yes.
And then everybody's involved. So we rely as a patient a lot on the insurer and the doctor to work things out, to give me the best option available for the price,
insurer
right?
always feels left out,
Oh, really?
Yes. Yes, because the information between the patient and the doctor is very rich, right?
Yeah.
And the insurer doesn't know what has been,
But then again, why should I tell the insurer? The doctor is talking about my life here. You
Yes.
just need to know how much to pay as the insurer, right?
Yeah, the doctor says you have insurance, let's order 2 other tests.
Okay,
Right, so the insurer
okay.
is left out of that conversation, right?
So should the insurer be in that conversation? Would that make things better?
Okay, I've heard this before. And patients said that because my insurance doesn't pay for this test, my insurance is responsible if I become very sick.
Wow, okay.
Right? And the insurer says, you should decide on the test based on whether you really need it medically or not. And whether it's in my fine print that I will pay for it is a separate matter.
But I trust my doctor. He says I need Da Vinci. I'm like, go for it, right?
Yeah, unless the insurer said, Da Vinci
Yeah.
is... Because insurers have to be fair to all their patients.
Yeah.
So the contract is applied to all the customers. And they have to be consistent in that.
So now there's a lot of discussion and
Yes.
consultation going on, right?
Right.
I mean, what do you think of some of the things that you're trying to hash out and iron out? Are they trying to standardize, certain things, certain procedures, certain costs?
I think premium inflation is something that's on
Okay.
everyone's mind.
I think one man's
Yeah.
meat is
Yeah.
another man's poison. And
Yeah.
so there is a high degree of a zero-sum game. The more that the private hospitals or private healthcare charge, the less the insurers will be able to obtain as margins at the end of it. And really patients and customers can only bear that much premium escalation year on year before the whole system breaks.
So I know of people who downgrade and they've been paying
Yeah.
this super high premium for the last 10 years and now they have to downgrade and they feel like, I've lost out the whole benefits from the last 10 years when I've been well. But that's...
the whole point of medical insurance is that it covers you for that 12-month period. So it's really like your travel insurance, which you don't buy.
Yeah.
Right?
Might change my mind,
that
actually.
when you don't claim it, you should feel happy.
Yeah.
there's
So
the irony.
exactly,
See,
you buy it, but you don't want to claim
very
it.
few people feel
Yeah.
that way and look back and say,
Yeah.
wow,
Paid $5,000
that was
never
the
used.
$5,000
wasted.
that I didn't have to use, and that's
Yeah.
great. So, but the challenge then is,
Okay.
and I really want to take us back to this notion of value, right? Insurers, and I've worked with many of the insurers, they are very willing to pay for value. The difficulty then is in defining what this value
Right.
is, and very broadly, value is the outcome divided by the cost of the resource.
Yeah.
And
So-
if we don't have the data, it's very difficult to say whether we're getting value or really
actually,
we're not.
I mean, as you're saying, the doctor's bills seem to be okay. It's really the hospital, the room you're paying for, the ward. So maybe that's what they should be doing, talking about saying, let's take lobster off the menu, and make sure it's gone forever.
You
can
said
just,
it, not me.
You can just have
You
ikan
said it.
bilis instead,
And absolutely, it's almost like for all of us in the corporate world, you have travel policies. If it's less than 3 hours, 6 hours, these are the class of travel and so
Right,
on.
right.
The type of hotels. So
Yeah.
so I would divide the hospital facilities into those that
Okay.
impact service quality and those that impact clinical quality. Service quality
Right.
like lobster and so on.
Okay.
I think very reasonable that we negotiate these down or out. But where we run into issues like, for example, robot versus
Okay,
laparoscopic,
that's true.
that's when, personally, I think that the insurers can actually up their game.
I didn't know that they were not paying. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I mean-
This example is not very
basically
good.
figure
Yeah.
out-
We're all learning something new today.
Yeah, no, that's
No,
news
it's
to
true.
me.
As a
Yes.
patient, I don't want. The doctor says, "Which machine do you want?"
Yeah,
You're like,
you
"Which
really
is
don't-
cheaper?"
yeah.
Right? But I think it should be an
best
option
one.
to
It
say
shouldn't be about
for your
money.
food,
Yeah.
you can have menu A or menu B with lobster, which costs $50 more, for example.
But this is not
and
covered.
you pay, and
So-
then you pay for it as a
And
patient.
it's like any restaurant, right? This is the
Yeah.
set meal. These are the options plus $10
That's true.
and plus $15. So
Okay.
as long as customers know what they are
Okay.
paying for, fair.
As we just begin to wrap up, one more question. So, how worried should we be about this? Is it a chance that other insurers will jump on? Is there a point where government needs to step in and say, "Hey, cool it, guys, let's work something out"?
I think we shouldn't worry that insurers are looking for means or ways not to pay for the services that the customer requires, right? But this having to manage the overall cost is something that it's a tool that the insurers use to try to reduce the premium increase for the following years. I don't pretend that premiums will ever come down,
Yep.
but I think premium escalation is going to happen because the bills escalation has happened. Okay, so in the past 1 year, in 2024, it was terrible.
So can you give us
yeah.
year on year? Are we talking about like 5% increase?
I think
10%? 10 to 15%.
they are saying that
Okay.
in 2024 there was a 20% increase,
Wow.
right?
Okay.
In hospital claims, right? In hospitalization claims. So premiums will go up by that. So I think every insurer is feeling the need to reduce. That's my
Yeah.
understanding.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
I think basically
Yeah.
rising healthcare cost bad for everybody.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
we as society, the dollar we spend in healthcare is the dollar we don't spend in education or really
Yeah.
anywhere else.
Correct.
But I do hope the insurers and the healthcare providers can come to an equilibrium because they need each other.
Right.
If there weren't private hospitals, nobody would need to buy insurance.
That's true.
Right, and if there wasn't insurance, very few of us would walk into a private hospital and say, take out our credit card and say, do whatever you need to do.
Yeah, that's right. Wow, okay. And with an aging population, we cannot deny
It's a
that
costly
actually,
affair.
yeah, that's why there's more hospital treatments, right? Because
Yeah.
more of us need it as we get older.
Yes, so this is an issue that will not go away, but it has to be better managed.
So I've learned quite a fair bit today.
Yeah, you're gonna buy
and
travel insurance, huh?
let's just it's certainly gonna relook as well at,
Yeah, think about it.
across my
Come
insurance.
on.
I'll start with a folder.
Yes, we hope this has been insightful and helped create some awareness on what's been going on out there. And we do love to hear from you. So if you have any thoughts, comments, do drop us a note, of course, at on our YouTube channels, or just drop us an email.
Right, and just before we go, a big thanks to our team. We've got Tiffany Ang, Junaini Johari, Joanne Chan, Saye Win, Ho Pei-ning, Shaza Dalila, and Ellison Jenner. And let's not forget, video by Hanida Amin. All right, that's all we've got for you this week. See you next week.